So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. We, on March 14th, had a town hall, which I think you all are aware of, and the participation was really outstanding. There are probably 200 or so folks who showed up in person. At Manoa, we had more than 1,000 people who watched the live stream as it was happening. And the last time I checked, we had more than 1,700 people who had reviewed the posting online, the video in two segments, both the presentation that I made, but also the questions and answers. So we had 2 full hours of conversation, which I'm really glad we had the opportunity to do. So today I'm not going to spend, obviously, if that was 2 hours, you don't have 2 hours today to go through it again, and all of that is on the record. So I'm going to walk through just a few pieces and highlight what has changed. As it turns out, things have changed since last Thursday. It is a constantly evolving situation, but I begin here with a slide that I showed at the town hall, and I'll show you some other slides from there as well. But just because it undergirds everything that we're doing, that we begin and end with the values that we stand for as we make decisions that are incredibly challenging in a moment where there is no playbook going forward. And I won't read through these, but they certainly are articulated in repeated places. I will add an interesting fact that just occurred, I think it was yesterday. Moody's has now downgraded the outlook for higher education from stable to negative. And so you get a sense this is not just us saying this, but this is a national phenomena at this point as it relates to the threat to higher education and what I truly believe is probably the biggest existential threat that we've faced in probably our lifetimes to the work that we do. So part of the way, too fast. Part of the way I've tried to explain this are in buckets, given that there's so many things coming so quickly. The first one being, as you heard many of the testifiers reference, are the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, executive order, dear colleague letter, and they're referenced up here. There's a number of different ones that have come out subsequent. But all of them center around the concept of changing the notion of what it means to violate civil rights laws. It is true that the executive orders do not establish law. They are the executive's interpretation of the law. And some of that is in line. I think we would say, it cannot contradict existing statutes or state authority, but certainly the executive has indicated what they believe that is. And the easiest way to describe this would be to move from a race-conscious approach to providing equity, where sometimes we recognize folks start from a different position, and therefore we need to take these things into account in order to achieve equity, to very much a race-neutral, where any use of race in any context becomes problematic and potentially discriminatory. So that's sort of underlying the background. Part of the challenge for the university is not only the threat of losing federal funds, but also a certification requirement in order to receive additional funds or to unstick frozen funds that requires us to say that we are DEIA free. And that is a certification that has civil penalties attached to it and broader federal funding attached to it rather than just the piece that's at issue. It can be quite a bit broader on that. There was a preliminary injunction issued. We did participate in a corollary order here with the Attorney General, so we're very proud of that. And there was a preliminary injunction issued specifically for the certification piece as it relates to this. Unfortunately, as of Friday, the appellate court reversed the stay at the lower court. So we are no longer under a preliminary injunction as it relates to the certification requirement, which creates a significant additional layer of risk, as you can imagine, on the university. So did want to report that piece of change. The second large bucket that we've been talking about really relate to NIH funding, National Institute of Health, and also the Department of Education, which continues to evolve, as I'm sure everyone knows. The National Institute of Health is a huge component of our funding for biomedical research and indirect cost recovery. Sounds like an esoteric concept, but really is about all of the monies that are necessary in order to run a research operation. and they're part of the federal government's support of universities conducting that research. And those are individually negotiated costs. They tend to be between 55 and 65%. At UH, the federal executive order categorically set it at 15%, which is truly a catastrophic event for biomedical research. Once again, we participated with the Attorney General in filing a lawsuit. We provided support in terms of the effect on UH, and that at the moment is under a preliminary injunction. So I can report that. Also, the Department of Education, I think everybody's been following that in the last few days. There was a 50% reduction, 48%, something like that, in terms of the workforce that happened last week. My understanding is any moment now there will be an executive order signed that directs the abolishment of the Department of Ed. I think you all have seen on television that that is a congressional determination that needs to be made, but as recently as 2 days ago, we were told that this would not affect, this meaning the reduction in force that the DOE has experienced would not affect financial aid because they did not have a reduction in force for that particular area of the Department of Education. We don't know now with the move toward abolishment how that affects what will happen. And I should say the particularly challenging part of that is that our third largest number of grants comes from the Department of Education. Those are our community-oriented grants and our many of our student services as they relate to Native Hawaiian populations. The third piece is one that really has received the least attention but probably is the most concerning to me, and that is a directive, again, an executive order for DOGE to work with all agencies across the federal government to implement, either terminate or reduce or eliminate grants and contracts, beginning with those held by universities. And so very clearly we are at the top of the list in terms of who is under the gun, if you will, or who is in the crosshairs for that. And we wait to see the effects of that. We haven't seen anything come out since then. Finally, I'll mention, I know that it got attention last week that the University of Hawaii was identified on a list of 60 universities as of concern under Title VI for anti-Semitic activity. There's been a good deal of press coverage around this, but as I've reported, to the best of my knowledge, what that was based on, at least with respect to that order, was a single open OCR complaint. Where the last action was taken by us I think in July, and nothing had happened since then with the department. And since the town hall, an additional letter has been released targeting 50 institutions for follow-up investigations, and the university was not on that list. So that's where we are with that. In terms of what is the effect, I should say there are about 33 stop work orders at this time. And we can talk about what that means, but that's the immediate. So I'm not going to go through this list. I've done it extensively at the town hall, but I do want to comment on just a few things given some of the comments that were made today to make sure that we're continuing to try and be as accurate in our messaging as possible. Absolutely no action has been taken against any program or service throughout the university based on diversity, equity, inclusion, or accessibility. The status quo as it was when I came in is the status quo of where it is now. Those services remain in effect and they continue to be provided. As it relates to the language on the website, the words diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility have been co-opted negatively by the federal government, and so we have asked departments to identify where those words are in use on our websites and to ask the question, is it an accurate assessment now that there is a negative connotation attached to it to describe the actual work that's being done? If it isn't, are there better ways to describe it that capture the essence of the work and allow it to continue? No one has been directed to remove any websites or to remove any language. Part of this is a walk down the middle of trying to respect autonomy and decision-making by the folks who hold these programs, and also to accurately communicate the risk that is created by that language, as reflected in the multiple emails I receive on a daily basis from folks inside and outside of our community who identify that language on our website as a reason for reporting this university to the federal government. So just understand these are not esoteric threats, these are actual events that are taking place, and we continue to try and find the best way forward. The reason that is not a dictate from on high is one of autonomy and respect. However, OGC has worked with everyone involved to communicate risk and to give the risk assessment. So we are not asking non-lawyers to assess risk. We are flagging for non-lawyers where the risk exists and then having conversations in conjunction to identify whether it makes sense to change them or not. And I will say this, I said this at the town hall, you know, we are talking about actual meaningful statements that are describing what we do in meaningful ways, not game playing. You know, there was some reports that I got of folks changing the word women to wahine. That's not what that's not going to, you're exactly right, that is going to do exactly nothing and looks like we are not being serious about this. So it is not going to those 3,000 word lists, it's not doing anything other than assessing risk and asking, is this an accurate interpretation of the work that you're doing? And some have concluded that it is. And so it is still, in fact, up today. So to just very briefly go over the takeaway that I hope all of the board has seen, but if you have not, to reemphasize this, we are on a daily basis looking at and assessing our risk for losing grant money, not just retrospectively. This is a really important, what I'm going to show you is retrospective in terms of what do we have now that we may lose or not get renewed. Understand there's an entirely different set of risk for prospectively as funding streams change and grants discontinue to be awarded in any respect. But we identified them into three categories: high, medium, and low risk, and you can see here how we did that. And worth saying here a million times, you know, this stuff has changed since last Thursday. It's changing on a daily basis. So literally what you see is a snapshot in time, not a complete picture of the risk. And there are additional pieces of risk I'm going to show you here before I end that are outside what we already know that really are not being discussed in the media. A reminder, the board I'm sure knows this information, but I have flashed this up for the rest of our community, worth doing so again here. The overall parameters of our budget: state funds, $1.3 billion. Thank you to the state legislature. The strong support we get from them does insulate us to a large extent in comparison to other universities around the country. So we're very, very fortunate in that. However, a very significant amount of money outside of our general funds, $370 million last year, and of course it varies by year, is in federal funds that are at issue right now. And understand, those are not discrete pools of money. They are integrated into all of our activities. It's not as if, and in some funding streams, some personnel are multiple sources of funding. So here's the takeaway that we shared based on our initial assessment. We do, and as I told the community at that time, I think it's important that we not lie to each other about what this is or soft pedal it, but to be clear about the potential consequences that we're facing, because they are significant and they are unprecedented. And worst case scenario, we are assessing in the, you know, if we went through the high risk categories, up to 2,500 employees potentially are at risk. That's about 15% of our workforce. Across the campuses, that's about 1,300 folks. Our CUH is another 1,200. If we go on the best case, there certainly have already been jobs. We've moved some of these folks to different funding streams to the extent that we can. We have been able to protect graduate students. I said, and I commit, that that is our highest priority in terms of maintaining their education and their movement forward, but that is not a sustainable approach. And as you can see here, DOE programs we talked about, those are student facing, so those are particularly of concern. Very briefly, again, not to rehash what I said in the forum, but important, I think, to remind the board and folks who are evaluating with us the danger of the current moment. All of this is about what we have, not what's coming. And there's more than one way to cripple the university. You can cut funding, you can stop funding, or you can squeeze it. By not holding meetings to award funding, by requiring justification for every dollar that is spent on a grant, by refusing to convene. We're seeing that and hearing reports of that. So there's quite a significant amount of additional work that's being placed with the continuing resolution on the federal budget that actually amplifies because of the amount of discretion that is now within the federal executive to determine where funding is distributed through the agencies. So if anything, this has gotten more significant. And of course, we have wonderful partners in the state, but the state is also likely to lose some of their federal funding for very significant other programs, including health, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, that's increasingly looking likely. And we also receive significant pass-through dollars that come through the state that are likely to be cut. At the end of the day, there is some rumbling that student financial aid also may be in trouble. Before all this happened, there was a $2 billion arrears for Pell Grants, and obviously that is likely to become a bigger problem as we go forward. So just want to restate again, I appreciate the testimony that we heard today. We need to keep having these conversations. We need to have them openly, and we need to, as a community, continue to work together to move forward. I have the advisory committee that I created. We've met twice already to talk about these issues, to let different community stakeholders from system-wide groups have the conversation with me. I've met extensively with individual governance groups at the different campuses, and I will continue to do that. We need to do that. That's important. But what I will say very clearly, and I'll say it again, we are absolutely committed to fighting for this community to the maximum extent that we can. We are also committed to following federal law to the extent that the federal law is clear. That is our role in a democracy. And so we continue to walk this line together and try and find the best path forward. We will not always agree, and I respect that, absolutely. But we should be able to have these conversations no matter how difficult they are. So we're committed to doing that, and we'll continue to do that. I feel like we just can't leave without saying something positive, because one of the messages I want to say clearly to the board, but also to this community, we cannot spend the next 4 years or however amount of time playing defense. We cannot just minimize harm. We have to be actively moving the university forward in positive ways strategically. So just to give you a few quick points high here. The news was out yesterday about the athletic director search. We're excited about that. We're moving forward. So far, I think we're on track, as we said we would be, and we're hoping to bring someone to this board as a recommendation by early summer. So stay tuned for that. One thing that I'm really excited to talk about is why we're actually here. And that's the academic enterprise and the impressiveness of the programs that we offer and the excellence across the university. UH Manoa, once again, was recognized as one of the best in the world by QS rankings. Just to give you a few examples, number 11 is linguistics in the nation and number 40 in the world. Extremely impressive. Library and Information Management, number 17 in the United States, and in the second top 50 to 100 in the world. And Earth and Marine Sciences, number 20 in the United States, and again between 50 and 100 in the world. Several other areas placing them in the top 1% internationally. So bravo to our faculty and staff and our graduate students, let me say that clearly too today, who are doing the hard work that are really making this university an exceptional place. Basic Needs Grant, we were just awarded $60,000 to work on this. That's just always good news, and we will have UH Giving Day in April. I personally will be committing money both to the Graduate Student Fund, the emergency fund that we created to help graduate students, and for food security. And I ask all of you to consider joining me in supporting those important areas. And finally, just because it seems important, I want to give a quick shout out to the UH Manoa women's basketball team and Coach Laura Beeman, who not only were honored in the Big West, but will be taking on UNLV in the WBIT here in just a few short hours. So, in spite of all of the challenges that we face as a community, let's not also lose sight of what joins us together and brings joy to so many people. And I'll end by saying, go Bows. Thank you.